Thanks for watching The Thought Criminals, named after the Orwellian criminalization of independent thought and free speech. I'm your host, Rachel Alexander. I'm a weekly contributor to Townhall and other sites, and the editor of Intellectual Conservative. And this is my mall, Ralph Benko, who worked in or with the Reagan, W. Bush, and Trump White Houses. He's a weekly columnist for Newsmax, co-author of the Capitalist Manifesto, and co-founder and executive chairman of the 184,000 member Capitalist League Facebook group. And this week, we're going to talk about the difference between conservatism and populism. Then we're going to move on to Ron DeSantis and his possibility of becoming the next president. And then we're going to juxtapose that versus whether Donald Trump is possibly going to run for president. So beginning with conservative versus populism, I was actually prompted to write this article because of you, Ralph, declaring that there are differences between conservatism and populism. And while I've always thought there was, I mean, let's look at Ross Perot, who ran as a third-party candidate for president in 1992, and clearly half of his positions were not conservative, leading a lot of us to think, okay, populists are, they're somewhere between Democrats and Republicans. But we've had this wave under Trump of conservatives who now call themselves populists, and we have everybody calling Trump a populist. So I dug to the bottom of it. And what I found was not what I was expecting at all. Basically, what I found was while conservative populists, those who call themselves conservative populists, are pretty much what I expected. They just seem like the rest of us conservatives. There's a perception out there that the left and the mainstream media has developed that they are actually these people who either one, complain all the time, or two, there's a whole bunch of positions that they have ascribed to conservative populists, just the most derogatory, combination of things. And one more thing I should have mentioned first, basically the generic definition of a populist is somebody who does not like being ruled by the elites. He wants, the people to generally have the power. So I basically come to the conclusion that while, it's great for conservatives to call themselves populist, because a lot of these positions, whether you're anti-legal immigration, or you want to put sanctions on China because you don't believe it's fair that they are using these workers in horrible conditions to compete with us, or you don't want the US involved so much militarily around the world. Those have all been traditionally conservative positions in many ways, or at least one of two conservative positions on those issues. So I understand that. I just am concerned that there is a perception that conservative populists actually aren't just regular old conservatives. So we need to be very careful if we are going to describe ourselves as such. So what do you think, Ralph, since I know you don't like that?
Well, could you just give us the TLDR on your column from Townhall, talking about the distinction between conservatism and populism, and how there are also populist progressives, and so it represents a substantial change in the political taxonomy. It used to be between left and right, and now it's between more, as much between top, inside and outside, as it is between left and right. And so, if you believe in power of the people, you could be a conservative or you could be a progressive. I call it mob rule either way. I've been hostile to democracy, which the founders also thought was a recipe for disaster. And I'm in line with the guys who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the guys who wrote the Constitution. None of them were Democrats. The Constitution does not include the word democracy even once. And in Article 4, Section 4, there's a provision that requires the federal government to ensure that every state has a Republican form of government. And so the first time some states started electing Democrats to office, we should have sent in the army and clean that right out, because it's clearly unconstitutional.
That was priceless. And that does remind me, I have meant to write an article, which I need to do too, and I probably will in the next couple of weeks, about the Democrats' liberal, there's another twist, the Democrats' liberal use of the word democracy lately. They constantly are throwing out the word democracy as if, right, as if we are a democracy, and they completely, forget that word Republican democracy, or, whatever nuance you want to put in describing us, in that we do have a system of
Hey, hold on. The correct term, if you're going to use that hated term democracy, is representative democracy.
It's also Republican democracy
which is a synonym for republicanism. So republicanism means representative democracy, where the people elect people to represent them using their best judgment, which is very different from direct democracy, which is just a euphemism for mob rule.
So what would you say we should do about all these people calling themselves conservative populists? I mean, are they giving themselves, let me just read you what one writer described conservative populists as being. This is in my article. He said it's those who oppose political pluralism and minority rights, regularly indulge in conspiracy theories, favor aggressive forms of identity politics, disparage political opponents, including the establishment, as downright illegitimate, erode constitutional norms, deliberately undercut civil society, press toward authoritarian forms of government, and thereby threaten the very basis of liberal democracy itself.
And who said that?
This is a writer, I believe, for the American Enterprise Institute, who was basically quoting what the left is describing conservative populists as.
Okay, well, there's a big fight going on now between authoritarianism, a bunch of former conservatives or conservative apostates like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, have basically gone over to get in bed with the Elizabeth Warrens of this world by calling for big government solutions, whether it's the whether it is attempting to have the federal government regulate what we can and cannot say on social media, which is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. And you've got the Josh Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes out there who are actually pushing for this form of soft fascism. And in Hawley's
about those two.
I'm not even sure how soft the fascism is.
I don't agree, because you saw my column from last week where, I pointed out that this sense, we are almost being ruled by quasi-corporate / government, entities. At this point, the corporations are so intertwined with the government that when people are, calling back for censorship or regulation of these corporations, this is not people who want to regulate the private sector. You can no longer completely say that those are private animals at this point. So no, I don't agree that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz are becoming big government fascists.
Well, I'm not sure they're becoming big government fascists, or whether they've been big government fascists all along. And you'll never persuade me that getting the government to regulate speech, which the First Amendment straight out unequivocally prohibits, is an acceptable kind of thing. So I guess that's just kind of one area where you lean toward fascism. And I'll just have to, rethink my thing. Since I have such high regard for you, Rachel, I'll have to reconsider whether my opposition to fascism is really wise. Or
do
that
you
I should.
think anyone, I'm the former treasurer of the Libertarian Students of University of Arizona. Do you think anyone is going to believe that I am a fascist?
I would never have guessed. You've just hit it so well up until now that I'm, a little bit, but I'm not taking it back with you. I'm taking it back with me. If you're, playing footsie with fascism, then I'm going to have to take another look at it.
The only way that I would look like a fascist to anyone is if you were an anarchist.
I'm no anarchist. I'm a classical liberal, small L liberal, meaning liberty-minded, conservative Republican, a small r Republican, believing that the people need to elect their government and then stay on top of them to make sure that they are carrying out the popular will. So there's a big fight going on in the world, not just in America, not just the Josh Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes, but their ilk, like Vladimir Putin and Erdogan and Xi Jinping, the Josh Hawley of China. So there's been a big upsurge in authoritarian strongman rulership to which Hawley aspires. I'm hoping he doesn't get there, but I'm not sure we can stop him. And if he wants to be America's Xi Jinping, well, I guess as H.L. Mencken used to say, H.L. Mencken defined democracy as the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. So we'll see where that goes.
Well, that's a great quote, but I still don't see the correlation between people like Josh Hawley and fascism. I think he's, one of the people, holding his finger in the dike, keeping us from fascism. But okay, we can agree to disagree on that one. Let's move on to your
Ron DeSantis, yes.
Yes, and I love the fact that you're actually on board with him, because I think he would make an excellent president. But I still think Trump's going to run, and I still would pick Trump over DeSantis any day. So let's make your case, Ralph. Ralph, are you still here? Are you on mute?
Yeah. So here's the thing about DeSantis gave a speech before the Common Sense Society in Florida. I hadn't heard of it before, but it was founded by a Hungarian, a refugee from Hungarian communism who had come to the United States to breathe the sweet air of freedom and made himself a businessman, a successful businessman. But his introduction of DeSantis was amazing, because what he described what life under communism in Hungary, which was a satellite of the Soviet Union, was exactly like wokeism. The state and the powers that be, the party was paying strict attention. If you said anything that was critical of the party, you would be punished for it, because the party was doctrinally considered to be the representative of the people. And so by criticizing the party, no matter how oppressive they were and how incompetent they were, that made you an enemy of the people, and they canceled you. So this gentleman gave a great brief speech talking about what it was like, and then he introduced Rick DeSantis as the next president of the United States. Now, in my column, I said, if Trump doesn't win, if Trump gets tired of politics. So I'm not saying that in a head-to-head fight, DeSantis could beat Trump, but I really think that Trump may have had enough, and he may just decide that he himself is not going to claim the nomination. Although if Biden looks snake bit enough, then I have a philosophy of Donald Trump, and that is nobody knows what Donald Trump is going to do until he does it, including Donald Trump. So to predict what Donald Trump is going to do is a fool's errand. I don't think even Trump knows what he's doing. But the fact is, Trump took a sucker bet in 2016 because he knew that nobody in their right mind, or even me, who's not in my right mind, thought that he had any chance of winning. So just by running, he could generate $5 billion of free publicity, because he plays the media like a violin. He doesn't care what they say about him as long as he's the center of attention, which is political genius. It's pop culture transposed to politics.
One thick skin.
Right. And so, he's got a very thin skin and a fragile ego, but he's willing to, as long as he's the center of attention, he's willing for people to say whatever they want to say about him. So he's constantly saying outrageous things to provoke attention, and the media falls for it time after time. The point, though, is in 2016, this was a sucker bet, because even if he lost, since nobody expected him to win, then he could get $5 billion of free publicity, and nobody would think the worse of him for losing, because they would have considered it to be a quixotic effort. Now, the fact is he managed to stumble into victory, but in 2020 he lost. And okay, he can claim that the election was stolen, and gullible people like Rachel Alexander might give some
We're not
credence to
even
that.
gonna go there because we'll just get banned again. So
Yeah, I know.
we
But
don't
the
even
point
need to,
here,
we don't even
the
need to
point
address
here is
that.
he's scored as an L, as a loss. If he runs again in 2024 himself, and he loses again, then all of a sudden his protestations that it was stolen and whatever begin to wear pretty thin, and it hurts his brand and his ability to raise lots of money. So Trump thinks in bets, and he's always a sucker better. He finds a bet, he can lay off the risk on some sucker, and he can pocket the wins if he wins, as he did with his bankers and as he did in politics. So my fearless prognostication, unless Biden doesn't start bouncing back, if Biden looks like a total loss, then Trump may do a double reverse gainer and come back in and grab it for himself. But I think he's going to try to position his son, Don Jr., to run, because then if Don Jr. wins, and Don Jr. is a very capable young politician, and he's playing his cards very well. He's connecting with the donor base. He's connecting with the activist base. He's connecting with the operatives and so forth. He's cultivating a lot of social capital, which he could convert to political capital if his dad decides to sit this one out. And if his dad decides to sit one out, puts Don Jr. out there, you still got a Donald Trump running for president. And if Don Jr. wins, then Donald Sr. will take all the credit, because it's his name, it's his party, it's his donors, it's his operatives, it's his media savvy. And so once again, and if Don Jr. loses, he can say, oh, well, that was Don Jr. He's no Donald Trump. So he gets to lay the risk off on a sucker. And by the way, Don Jr.'s would be a happy little sucker, because being the Republican nominee would vault him to a win or lose to a whole higher level of prominence. And so it's win-win for Don Jr. It's no lose for Donald Sr. And so I predict that Donald Sr. is going to sit it out, use his son Don Jr. as a proxy. And if that's the case, I have no doubt in my mind that Ron DeSantis is going to come in, and it will be a very interesting. Ron DeSantis is formidable. And even though Don Jr.'s got the name, got the funding base and whatever, he's not a feral political genius like his father, or demagoguing.
I disagree there. I think he's brilliant. Have you read his books?
No.
He's actually written them himself. I think he's as smart as his dad is. And he's definitely smarter when it comes to not saying, crazy things on Twitter. I mean, he definitely says biting things, but he doesn't say anything that's going to get, we need to have the Secret Service investigate.
I will be absolutely appalled if Don Jr. gets the nomination, and I'll be absolutely double appalled if they win, because to me, that's the end of the republic. And we've got a Trump imperium, a la Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Claudius Caesar, and so forth. And I'm kind of a fan of Republican politics. I would hate to see America turn into the Trump empire. But, the good news is maybe I'll be dead by the time we get to the President Ivanka, or President Eric. So I'm not going to have to actually live through it. I'll just be sitting up in heaven or down in hell, eating popcorn, watching it go by. The point about DeSantis that I really loved in this speech was he identified the enemy as cultural Marxism. And he was really clear about this, and really clear. I wrote a column for American Spectator about 4 or 5 years ago called The Obama Bathroom Wars, and why Obama was doing this. And the point is that there was a communist strategist named Antonio Gramsci, who was actually a good communist rather than a bad communist, in the sense that he martyred himself in fighting fascism. And so anybody who's anti-fascism gets a certain amount of admiration for myself. He spent most of his last 10 or 15 years of his rather short life in prison, writing something called the Prison Notebooks. And he was saying, he invented a concept called cultural hegemony. Our cultural hegemony, yours and mine, and the conservative cultural hegemony is classical liberal, meaning liberty, meaning there are some God-given rights that even the state can't infringe on. Capitalist, Judeo-Christian, small r republicanism. Okay, the progressives, what they want is their form of radical egalitarianism that approaches nihilism, where there are no distinctions can be legitimately made, not between men and women. That's a gender fluid kind of thing. It's not a natural. It's not a fundamental categorical reality, natural reality. Okay, rich and poor. Well, it doesn't matter if you made your wealth the way, say, Jeff Bezos did by creating 1,400,000 jobs and by creating a company that sold people lots of things cheaper and more reliably than they could have gotten down at the mall, although I hear malls are coming back. So the fact is the left doesn't make a distinction between the legitimate, the people who legitimately made themselves rich and those who got rich out of privilege. To them, eat the rich. Rich is bad, as my second or third favorite member of Congress, AOC, says, no one can be a legitimate billionaire. Well, I disagree with you respectfully, Madam Congresswoman. If you make $1 trillion worth of value for the world, the way Elon Musk did, or the way Mark Zuckerberg did, or the way Richard Branson did, or the way Jeff Bezos did, and many others, if you put $1 trillion into the pockets of the people like you and me, and you pocket $1 billion for having created $1,000 billion in terms of real wealth in society, goods and services, that, God bless. You created $1 trillion, take $1 billion, take $10 billion. You can't spend it anyway. You're just going to reinvest it, hopefully, in creating even more equitable prosperity for society. So I love the fact that DeSantis went after the cultural Marxists. And I love the fact that he said, everything we've done right in Florida, we've upset the wokeists. Okay, the woke left has risen up to fight us, and we beat them every time. So I love the fact that rather than whining, which a lot of so-called conservatives and fake demagogic populists are whining about, those mean progressives, DeSantis decides to take a stand and beat them at their own game. And I'm like, hey, I love that. Now, I don't agree with all of his policies, and I'm not here to relitigate that. But boy, do I like his philosophy? Do I like his guts? Do I like his attitude? And do I like the fact that he is standing up for our cultural hegemony and in a very effective way, rather than playing the victim card and being a populist conservative snowflake?
Well, I like how you point out the, left's war on the rich, because one thing I have noticed in, over the years is those of us who are defending, the rich from having all their wealth taken from them are people like you and me who aren't wealthy. The noisiest people out there saying we don't need to tax the rich anymore are us middle class people. I've never earned over 6 figures in a year, ever, okay? And I probably never will. And I am one of the loudest people out there saying, look at economics, look at how it works. These people make jobs. And I recommend everybody go watch Representative David Schweikert's speeches on the House floor if you don't understand how this works. When you tax the rich, you ruin the economy. And as for DeSantis's chances, I will say this about him. One thing I like about him is he doesn't say the really careless things that are going to get him into trouble. I think that would be he'd be a safer bet than Trump in that sense. And I also feel like if we were to have Donald Trump Jr., I think he would also be safer and not saying these things that the left could jump on and attach to. I just don't see a huge difference other than that between all three of them. You make it seem like, DeSantis would be this great candidate, but on policy positions, he's hardly any different from Trump or Trump Jr.
I know he's just he actually has an attention span. So I'm not sure Donald J. Trump has been shown to have much of an attention span. I can't speak for Don Jr. I hate dynastic politics, and so the idea of having a dynasty, of a Trump dynasty, really makes me cringe. But that's okay. You will probably be exalted as one of his tribunes, and so you would look very cute with a little green pointy hat and one of those long trumpets, one of those long curly trumpets, announcing the coming of Donald Trump Jr. to give a speech. So
I have the same attitude about dynasties, so-called dynasties, because we still are a representative democracy. I have the same attitude about dynasties as I do wealthy people. While me, as a regular middle-class person who is not, connected, my entire family lives in another state my entire career, I feel like, yes, sure, I would like somebody who's just a regular middle-class person like myself and not connected. But if that's what it takes to get somebody in there with conservative principles to get the job done, then that's fine. And I always felt with Trump, I predicted this years before Trump ran for president. I predicted that we were in such a bad situation politically that the only way we were ever going to get another Republican in as president is they were going to have to be a celebrity, a la Ronald Reagan. That was how we were going to have to get someone in. And boom, along comes Trump. And so I feel like for us conservatives to stay in power, we might have to take people like him. He got in primarily because of his celebrity. That's just a fact. Like you said, it was surprising that he actually won in 2016. But
he's got very plebeian tastes. He loves professional wrestling, and he'll take a cheeseburger over caviar and champagne any day of the week. In fact, he doesn't even drink alcohol. He drinks Diet Coke or something like that. So he's got very plebeian tastes. I understand that. I understand his appeal to the lumpen proletariat. Okay, and you're not exactly a member of the lumpen proletariat, Rachel, but you heart them. So let's just see see where this goes. But I just think that DeSantis is remarkable, and to give him extra props. Clearly, he's on to Trump's methods. When Trump started whining that DeSantis wouldn't kneel and kiss the rod and promise not to run if Trump ran, Trump started beating him up. And then as soon as Trump noticed that DeSantis was not intimidated by his by his being slapped around by Trump, and it was actually bringing attention to DeSantis, Trump immediately backed off, pulled in his horns. And he recognizes, I think, that DeSantis is his most formidable potential rival. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
And one thing that is just so sad, but if Trump has really moved his residency to Florida, then it makes it all the less likely that Trump would run and have DeSantis as his VP in order to get.
Oh, good catch. Okay, well, we've gone over time once again, Rachel, because you have such interesting things to say. So thank you for saying them, and I hope this one goes viral and we attract millions.
Doesn't get banned.
And doesn't get getting banned is the quickest way of going viral. So.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and we'll have a great one for you next week too. God bless.
Bye-bye.